Welcome to this video on office procedures based on the Manual of Office Procedures 2010, revised and updated by the Nagaland Civil Secretariat. This video will focus on the issue of drafts, part 1. This part will address the marking of drafts, fairing of approved drafts, procedure to be followed in sections, procedure to be followed in desk, general instructions regarding typing, procedure where centralized typing pool exists, registration of drafts, and comparison. Let us begin with the marking of drafts. After a draft has been approved, the section officer will first examine the draft to see that all corrections of spelling, grammar, etc. have been properly carried out and that there are no typographical errors. The photocopy of signed communication will be preferably kept as office copy. They will ensure that copies of enclosures are attached to the draft where these are available in the branch. The officer will give clear indication on the draft where a communication is to be dispatched by a special messenger or fax or speed post or registered post on account of its special nature, importance, or urgency. The officer will then mark the draft for issue. If there are more than one draft for issue from the same file, then indicate the total number of drafts. For example, issue 3 drafts. And the officer will then mark the file for recording it in a case where the issue of said communication constitutes final disposal of the case under consideration. We will now look at the fairing of approved drafts. All stages of action after the approval of drafts, ending with signing of fair communications, will be performed in the section except where centralized typing pool exists. The same procedure may be followed for issue of drafts generated through computer. Let's now look at the procedure to be followed in sections. The section officer, while marking the draft for typing and before passing on the file to the diarist, will ensure that clear indication has been given where copies of any papers contained in any file are to be typed or photocopied or a computer printout taken as enclosures. The section officer will then enter the number of the file marked for recording as per para 72 subsection 6 in column 2 of the register for watching the progress of recording in the Manual of Office Procedures in the chapter Issue of Drafts, and pass on the file to the typist. The approved draft will be fair typed, compared, and get signed. General instructions regarding typing given in the para 73 of this manual in this chapter will be observed. On return of signature pads, the section officer will see that fair copies have been duly signed by the officer and make sure that corrections, if any, made while signing are carried out in all copies. The signed fair copies, together with office copies, drafts, and relevant files, will then be passed on to the diarist. Let's look at what the diarist will now do. The diarist will enter the number of the fair communications and office copies in messenger book and then send the fair communications and office copies along with messenger book to the dispatcher of the central issue section at appropriate intervals during the day. The dispatcher will remove the fair communications and office copies, and acknowledge receipt in the messenger book. In case of urgent communications, DAC may be issued directly from the branch concerned at the discretion of the section officer. Let's move on to understand the procedure to be followed in desk. After a draft has been approved or a letter has been dictated by the branch functionary for fair typing, the stenographer attached to the branch functionary will type the letter, get it compared and signed. General instructions regarding typing given in para 73 in this chapter of the manual will be followed by the stenographer. The stenographer will add all relevant enclosures to the signed communication and send it to the central issue section for dispatch through messenger book after making necessary entries in it. A branch functionary may draw on the services of the typing wing in the registry, wherever set up for attending to extra typing work. It is now time to understand some general instructions regarding typing. Urgent drafts will be attended to first. Fair copies of all communications will be typed on printed letterheads of suitable sizes. The name of the issuing departments with full address, including the PIN code, telephone number, telegraphic address, telex code, fax number, and email addresses, if any, will be printed on the letterhead. Fair copies will be typed with single spacing unless otherwise directed. The oblique lines drawn in the margin to indicate the number of enclosures to be sent along with the letter will be indicated at the appropriate places. Stencils will be cut whenever more than 50 copies of a communication are required. The typist will type his initials with date in the left hand bottom corner of the fair copy. Example, RCK backslash 1/12/2009. In a computer environment, username along with path will be indicated on the fair copy by the typist, except classified documents. Let's now move on to procedures where centralized typing pool exists. This will include marking of drafts, stamping of drafts, distribution of work. Let's begin with the marking of drafts. Section officer, while marking the drafts for issue and before passing on the file to the diarist, will first indicate whether fair copies are to be signed by the officer approving the draft or are to be authenticated for issue by the superintendent of the central issue section as per para 83 in this chapter on issue of drafts, and write the words with file on the draft where the file also is to be sent to the central issue section. Example, where copies of any paper contained therein are to be typed as enclosures. Next, the diarist will enter the file number of the file marked for record as per para 72 in the chapter issue of drafts in column 2 of the register for watching the progress of recording. The diarist will then remove the draft unless the file itself is to be sent to the central issue section, place it in the pad prominently marked drafts for issue, and make suitable entry. For example, sent for issue on 20th March 2001 in the margin of the notes portion of the file. The diarist will then mark the movement of the file in the file movement register mentioned in para 98 section 1 and in the appendix of the Manual of Office Procedures under Appendix 23, where the file is to be sent with the draft. The diarist will then enter the number of drafts of communications and of the files if the files are to be sent along with the drafts of communications in the messenger book. Then send these to the central issue section at appropriate intervals during the day and report to the section officer at the end of each day the number of drafts not received back within 2 days from the date those were sent to the central issue section. The receipt of the drafts of communications in the central issue section will be acknowledged in the messenger book and the messenger book returned to the branch concerned. On receipt in the central issue section, the drafts will be stamped with the use of an automatic numbering machine having an adjustable date as per specimen given below in the Manual of Office Procedures. We look at distribution of work. The drafts will then be placed before the section officer of the central issue section, who will mark them to the typists for fair typing by indicating their initial letters, example TKM, in the space provided in the stamp for the purpose. The typist will enter in the typist's diary, given in Appendix 12 in the Manual of Office Procedures, the drafts received by him for typing. The drafts will be typed in accordance with the instructions in para 76 of this chapter. Thereafter, at the end of the day, the typist will submit the diary together with the unfinished typing work to the section officer. The section officer will complete the distribution chart, arrange for the typing of urgent untyped work outside office hours where necessary, and take the arrears into account in allocating fresh work on the next working day. Let us now look at the registration of drafts. Before the drafts are handed over to the typists, these will be entered in the issue diary mentioned in Appendix 13 of the Manual of Office Procedures. Drafts of telegrams and other communications marked immediate will be entered in red ink to distinguish these from the rest. At the end of the day, the assistant maintaining the issue diary will submit his diary to the section officer for assessing areas and for taking appropriate action. Let us now look at comparison. The typed matter, along with the drafts and relevant files, if any, will be passed on by the typists to the comparers. The comparers will compare the fair copies with the draft, initial with date in the space provided for the purpose in the stamp affixed on the draft, attach enclosures, if any, and write the word attached below the oblique line on the office copy, and send the fair copies along with enclosures and the duplicate office copy, if any, together with the approved drafts in a signature pad to the officer concerned for signature. In the next part of issue of drafts, we will look at the signing of fair communications, issue of signed communication, dispatch of postal communication, dispatch of non-postal communication, return of papers, issue of interdepartmental notes, stamps account register, and actions after issue. Thank you for watching this video on office procedures based on the Manual of Office Procedures 2010, revised and updated by the Nagaland Civil Secretariat.